2 weeks ago, I was on the phone with Gauri, and she told me, just in addition to coming to India, that there is an expectation that I will be speaking about trials of a new nation, a South African perspective. And for the most part, I was very intrigued because there are just so many conditions facilitating what it means to be a young South African in South African society today. So there's lots to speak about, and I just thought, okay, well, where do I even begin? So I thought about the transformative power of storytelling, and I thought about the legitimacy of the lived experience and how I can speak of really myself and my journey, and how that can even serve as a microcosm of sorts to what it means to be a young South African woman today. So my name is Nomonde Jennefer Ndwalaza. I come from Soweto, which is really the biggest township in South Africa. If you know about it, it's probably because it really was a site of struggle during the apartheid, during apartheid, and a lot of protests happened in Soweto, and a lot of our struggle leaders actually come from there. Soweto today is really alive with possibility. We have an emerging middle class, but because South Africa is really just a country of such extremes, Soweto is also characterized by high levels of poverty. The education system, the schoolings there are not very good. There's high levels of unemployment and just other markers of entrapment that can be very, very challenging to one's development. So generally, if you're a young woman and you're from Soweto, you don't necessarily, the general narrative is not the narrative of that child that will go to a university and get their degree cum laude and find themselves in India speaking to people like you. That's not the dominant narrative. That's the exceptional story. Young women in Soweto have a greater chance of being victims of teenage pregnancy than anything else. And in South Africa as well, education is a commodity. One's ability to do well in life is really determined more by how educated your parents are and the class level of your parents, and how they can be able to give you a chance at a good education, as opposed to one's level of agency and ambition. So, okay, what was I going to say? We also have this concept in South Africa of the Bourne Freeze, right? So if you were born in 1994, which is when we ushered in democracy in South Africa, there's a lot of assumptions, and it's really a lens through which we use to try to understand what it means to be a young 21-year-old South African in society. So if you're born free, the assumption is that you are free from the residues of the apartheid system, and you are free to carpe diem and be the best that you can be. And I think it also speaks a lot about us as South Africans, and how, in as much as we think that we are done with the past is not necessarily done with us. Because being a born free in South Africa, it's a very, very, very contested identity. And it can be problematic to just make those types of assumptions about apartheid and how it's over, because it doesn't give us a chance to try to assess the structural inequalities that still exist in our country, and how we can actually go about trying to sort them out, and trying to understand, okay, well, how did we get here and how do we fix it? So for the most part, we look at inequality in South Africa, and we look at the government. We look at the levels of corruption in the government, the leadership deficit of sorts, and we complain. We come on talk radio stations and we complain about the state of the nation. We look at business and the private sector and how they see corporate social investment more as homework as opposed to some social justice imperative. And there's something, I think, inherently problematic about the way in which inequality and poverty in our society has really, really become so normalized. So we complain about beggars and how these people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But you find yourself driving at the robot, and there's a woman who has an infant or a toddler in her hands, right? And the toddler is basically used as some sort of a bargaining tool to get you to be more sympathetic to her and her situation in an effort to try to elicit more money from you. And we don't take the time to actually just understand what is it about our society and the levels of hopelessness that would actually get someone to be so desperate and to do something like that, you know. And I think when we look at the government and we look at the public sector, there's something very disempowering about looking to others to solve these types of problems, you know. Zamantunga Khumalo has a quote about inequality and how she speaks about the fact that in as much as inequality is a national problem and a local problem, it does also have a personal element to it. And there is something about it that speaks to what are you doing in your sphere of influence to try to build South Africa. You know, so for instance, if you are a middle class man or woman and you have a domestic worker and a helper, are you paying her the bare minimum? And can you not afford to pay her more money so that maybe she can have her child and get her child to go to a good school and get a good education and try to sort of break that cycle of poverty? Do you complain about corruption in government, but you find yourself drinking on a Friday night and you're stopped by the police and you're quick to give a bribe because you don't want to go to, you don't want to spend a night in prison? And I think if then we start to try to interrogate things like that, we then try to understand, we can understand that maybe we are actually part of the very system that we criticize and we spend so much time criticizing, you know. South Africa's democracy in 1994 ushered great expectations on all our part, you know, because a lot of us saw it as finally it's going to be a space in which we can all build a country firstly and we can all get the space to reach our full potential. And in the same way that we have buzzwords such as the Bourne Freeze, there was also the term reconciliation, which was also used as some government strategy that relates to nation building and social cohesion and tries to get us all to develop some cohesive identity as South Africans. But the thing with reconciliation is that in as much as it does have a national element, it is primarily relational. And it relates primarily to me as Nomonde Ndwalaza and how I relate to the people in my society. And whether or not because I occupy a certain position in society, I feel as though there are just certain people who exist just for the basis to serve me and do what I want them to do. And if we then have we have this relational approach to reconciliation, then it allows us to really have the courage to be the leaders that we have been waiting for, instead of complaining and lamenting and giving responsibility and power to other people. And I think if we do that, then stories such as mine stop becoming, I stop becoming like that exceptional Black child from South Africa that was able to find a position into being like middle class by virtue of just getting a university degree. Because fundamentally, when I look at my story, you know, and a lot of it I feel as if it's unwritten, and I don't consider myself to be there because I do have a lot of things that I want to achieve for myself. But I got to where I got to be, not necessarily because I was exceptional as such. I got to where I got to be because there were just people in my life in certain moments that became my lucky charm. So I had teachers who came into my mind and lit a fuse in a sense that's been burning ever since. Teachers that told me about university applications and bursary applications and scholarship applications. And my success and my achievements mean nothing if it means that the child in Joza and the child in Soweto and in Langa and even in here in New Delhi is unable to self-actualize and unable to get opportunities because of the social position they happen to be born in, or for something just as useless and as arbitrary as race. You know, my success just means nothing, and it's not even something worth lauding, because we shouldn't have to have these exceptions. It should be a space in which all of us can be the best that we can be. Okay. In Sesotho, we have a proverb. It says that motho ke motho ka batho. And it basically means that I am because you are. And I'm a big fan of my country. I think that there's a lot, we have a lot of potential, you know, and we have just so much to achieve. But I think there is also this sense of how everyone is there's also been this dominant narrative in the lectures this week about how we are such an individualistic society and everyone is just trying to maneuver for advantage for their part and everyone's just trying to get theirs. And I do believe that fundamentally there is a space under the sun for all of us. And we just need to have the courage to be the leaders that we are yearning for. Thank you.
tGELF, leading the change.